also indicate their names. And if you have new people also joining in, let us know and add their email addresses. Keep yourself muted and on silent unless you are unmuting to speak. We are happy, as always, to have your questions and comments in the chat section so that we can read those questions. We can read the comments as we move along. At the end of our discussion today, we will also have the survey that helps us to get to know how you interacted with today's meeting and to see whether there are areas that we can continue to improve on as we strengthen this program. And so I'd like to hand this program over to Andri, who will be leading us. Andri Chibisov from ACS, please take over.
Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, and good night for some of us. It's really a pleasure to be here today. My name is Andrei Chibisov. I'm the program manager for Global Capacity Development and Patient Support. Today we have the team from ACS, the team from Mobilico Changemakers, and of course the team from Steps Ahead Consulting, as well as all of our participants from the Beacon community. Nice to see everyone and welcome. Today's session is part of the series of Toolkit Deep Dive, and it's about Global Patient Navigation Toolkits, learning about patient needs. So today we'll be talking about how do you organize and what kind of experiences might you have with different types of needs assessment. So today's agenda is we will do a brief introduction, welcome, and then we will hear from two experts, one from Kenyatta National Hospital, Grace. She'll be talking about prostate cancer patient needs assessment that they conducted at Kenyatta National Hospital. And also Obote will talk about the Uganda Cancer Institute's patient shadowing exercise that they conducted several years ago. After that, please keep all your questions, actually put them to the chat during their presentations. And after that, we'll have a session on facilitated questions and answers, which will be followed by a short session of a period of reminders. Just before we begin, a little bit of information to help you position where to find the resources related to needs assessments. So first of all is, as you log into the community, you always go to the redesign toolkit page, which is, you can navigate using the black bar on at the top, and then toolkit, and then find that drop down in that menu. Always use that method of accessing the toolkit, because recently we have redesigned that page, and it now has a new name. It's called Toolkit Static. So I put the link on top here for you. Just make sure that you always use, navigate through the drop downs. And then if you go into section 2, all section 2 is dedicated to identifying the gaps in your service delivery, in barriers to care. And I just wanted to point out specifically 2.C and 2.D as those that are dealing with patient needs assessment and patient shadowing. So patient shadowing is part of 2C, and then patient needs assessment is part of 2D. And before we start on the content, I just wanted to share the feedback from the previous sessions. So thank you so much for those of you who do take time and fill out the post-session survey. It's very important for us. And you see, we always take it to heart and try to make changes to the following sessions based on your feedback. So the average score was 4.63 out of 5. Some of the things that went well were participants called out the information, all the information, especially some of the information that Heather shared. the experience in the early setting of the patient navigation. So I'm assuming that is speaking to what Grace and Abota were presenting. So what went well? I'll be better. What did not go well? So it'll be better if the presenter provides visual presentation too. And today we will have some slides from both Abota and Grace. It's too short to comprehensively discuss the problem, especially in establishing the patient navigation. Of course, we realize that we never have enough time during these webinars to cover everything. But remember that these webinars are not meant for all of us to comprehensively discuss a certain issue. This is just the start of the conversation. And then there will be other webinars. And actually, towards the end of the session, I'll announce some of these webinars that we are having in the next months. We've planned out a lot for you, both with the current experts and with some other folks that you haven't met yet or met briefly. So stay tuned and stay with us. Topics suggested for the future webinars, another Meet the Expert sessions, insights from professional project manager regarding the pilot plan, which is a great idea. So we're definitely taking that into account. How to do navigator training, and also how to guide patients to find the hospital services and what's the best way to educate patients in their disease. We'll be covering some of that information in the future webinars. But for now, I just wanted to take 1 minute for all of us to reflect back on some of the successes in our career, in our professional life, connected with healthcare, connected with cancer care. So anything, if you can just throw into the chat a couple of points that have been the biggest moment in your career. It could be, a success of any kind. It could be some kind of spiritual achievement. It could be learning or some pivotal moment that made you proud that you serve, that you work in the area of cancer care. And I'll ask Jessica to call out some of those, some of those things that get put in the chat. So just to get us started, for me, it was one of the biggest moments of my work in with cancer care was the graduation of the SOURCE program. We had back a few years ago, we had the program that was targeted at civil society organizations that are working in cancer, at improving the capacity to operate as an organization, to be more efficient and effective at what they're doing. And so graduation, that was back pre-COVID, so graduation was in person. And then we had a COVID graduation, which was also fun, but it was virtual. So just to realize that you have 50 organizations or 40 organizations in the country that are all working together to achieve similar goals or the same goal, and that have all gone through the same or similar training and some of the same experiences, that now know each other and are able to coordinate with each other better. That was a very big moment in my professional work here at ACS. Do we have any other moments? Okay, I see Meredith. Meredith, do you want to come off mute and just talk about that?
Sure. Again, I mentioned that highlight that I've had so far with Oncología and in my cancer career has been when I represented Oncología in Kuala Lumpur in 2018 at the World Cancer Congress. We did research about the challenges of women living with metastatic breast cancer, and we were awarded, I don't think that we were selected to present our research at the Congress and also in an abstract. So that was great. And I was about to type as well, another great achievement is that we won a grant to launch our patient navigation program, which is why we are all here right now.
Wonderful, wonderful. Great, thank you. Thank you so much. Do we have any other volunteer?
Yes, I can say something.
Go ahead, Grace.
My experience is having been involved with the patient navigation program design and seeing it being implemented. And my happiest moments is when I could see the patients come back and give positive stories of how the program has impacted their life. They came out and it was really, really thrilling to listen to those stories, just to know that the program has impacted on somebody's life and experience for the better.
Yes, thank you. You've had this privilege of working directly with patients, which is just amazing because on a daily basis, you just see the lives that you touch and whose quality of life you're making better. So this is amazing. Thank you. And we have Jessica also who typed something up in the chat. Do you want to say that, Jessica?
Yeah, 20 plus years ago, when I was just fresh out of college, I just walked into a hospice and asked what I could do. And they told me that to be able to interact with patients, I needed to attend a training on palliative care, which I did. And it was really an eye-opener. And it helped me to really understand a lot of things about cancer. And for some strange reason, then over different years in my life, I have been involved in cancer. I participated in Kenya's first Relay for Life in Nairobi and helped to coordinate that. And then over time, having partnered with the American Cancer Society, the journey still goes on. So, but that was a pivotal moment, just attending that training and getting just put into this world.
Thank you. This is fantastic. And I'm glad that you both mentioned patients. You all mentioned patients because this is what we are working. This is who we are working for. And today's session will be actually about how to make patients' lives a little easier, a little better, as they go through this complex journey of care and treatment. So thank you. Just a reminder, as you hear today's experts, please put your questions in the chat. And we have a team here that will be sorting through those. And then we will address these questions at the end of the presentations, after the presentations. Okay, so today we have Grace and Abota who have graciously come back for this session to continue sharing their wonderful experiences. Grace is a former patient navigation program co-lead at the Kenyatta National Hospital in Nairobi, Kenya, and she was at the very beginning of the program that is being still successfully run at the Kenyatta National Hospital. And we have Obode Amos, who is a patient navigator program manager. He has also been at the very beginning of the navigation program at the Uganda Cancer Institute in Kampala, Uganda. So first I'll give the floor to Grace, and then Obode will talk about patient shadowing. Over to you, Grace.
Thank you. Good morning. For those who are in the morning, we are here in the evening. My name is Grace Omlogoli, as you've all heard, and former patient navigation program co-lead. I'm going to present to you patient needs assessment on prostate cancer patients that we undertook at Kenyatta National Hospital in the urology department. Initially, prior, in 2015, we did a patient needs study that was carried out at the Cancer Treatment Center, and it was to establish the challenges that all the cancer patients were facing as they were accessing their services within the hospital. And this is what initially helped us to develop the current patient navigation program at the Kenyatta Hospital. This particular assessment was actually very formal. It required quantitative assessment. It required IRB approval and a lot of budgetary requirements, and of course, specialized analysis. And 3 years down the line, we needed to build out a component program targeted at providing tailored navigation services to the prostate cancer patients. And so we decided to carry out prostate cancer needs assessment. This particular one was very informal, and it was carried out, as I said, at the urology department, where prostate cancer patients are usually seen, in January 2020. The very purpose was to identify unique challenges, because we had perceived challenges that these patients were facing, which were unique, but we had not done an assessment to establish which ones exactly. And so we wanted to find out what are the unique challenges these prostate cancer patients faced that were acting as barriers to the accessing services within the hospital. And this was to be gotten from the perspective of the providers, patients themselves, and their caregivers. And then these findings would help us to build out a component program that was targeted at providing tailored navigation services to better address these barriers that would have been identified, and also to even document these unique findings, because we didn't have any findings that had been documented for prostate cancer before. And so, as I said, as compared to the initial survey of 2015, this particular one was very informal. We didn't have any budget for it. Neither did we get the IRB approval. And also, we did not require specialized analytic methods to be able to get the reporting. And so our navigators, during their navigation, the encounter time, they were able to, using an interview guide, obtain information from this patient after they had gotten a verbal consent from the patients, and be able to collect data that was very helpful to improve on the program. And the patient navigation manager herself obtained data from the staffs, and also after obtaining a verbal consent from them. And so this information was very helpful. 15 patients, 7 caregivers, 2 doctors, and 3 nurses were interviewed. If we given another opportunity, and then we could increase the number of days for data collection, probably, and then be able to cover even more respondents so that we get more authentic data, and also to avoid maybe the possibility of bias from the navigators who are the same people who are doing an encounter and also feeling that probably there was intimidation by the patients. We could get other staffs from within the organization who would be actually ready and willing to give volunteer services to collect this data, and so that we can avoid that kind of feeling that probably there could have been a bias. But what we know is that we got information that was very helpful, and it helped to actually improve on the program. So the results, that's the next. So the result was, it revealed that most of these patients came in at an advanced age. And they actually presented, those who were staged presented at a late stage of their disease, 80% of them, as we can see. And this meaning that most of them actually received palliative care. And we also noted that a lot of the patients were unemployed. Of course, looking at the age, they were not mostly in an employment age. So it means this patient would require a lot of support because they didn't have an income. And that would impact on the way we actually looked at the prostate cancer program. Next. Apart from the common challenges experienced by all the cancer patients that we had identified earlier, there were specific and unique challenges that these prostate cancer patients were experiencing, and they actually required some specialized kind of skills and knowledge and tact to be able to be addressed. Some of them that were so unique and needing very specialized attention were very sensitive issues like sexual dysfunction that the patient took to be very sensitive and were not easy, they could not easily open up, especially even in an encounter. And this was acting as a barrier to the accessing a lot of services. Culturally unacceptable diagnostic procedures like the rectal examination and castration that was required for them. Most of these patients were feeling embarrassed because it was not culturally acceptable. And this alone could just stop them from seeking services when they imagined that that is what they are going to be done. Things like gender and age of service providers. The patients were not comfortable discussing their sensitive issues with the young female service providers. And so they would not open up in front of these service providers. And they also came up with a lot of fear, shame, and self-isolation. They were isolating themselves because they were not wanting even the family members to know their status, lest they are abandoned. They were not wanting their children to be there and then listening to them discussing some sensitive sexual issues with the providers. And so if they were accompanied by any of these people, they would just close up and so not provide information and then get the necessary help. These are some of the unique challenges that affected these patients and affected the accessibility to services. And so these findings, we presented them to a webinar for KNH staff and also to the navigators during their prostate cancer training. And they were also referenced during clinic, during the clinic CMEs. A number of lessons, next slide, a number of lessons were learned as a result of this assessment. And so we see that as much as the needs assessment was informal, it provided great insights that helped to initiate changes, that helped to improve the prostate cancer patients' experience. The method used was actually did not require financial resources. And it also, as I said, did not require very specialized analysis. And so we found out that it is possible to carry out needs assessment even in financial constrained environment and also in the absence of specialized analysts, and be able to come up with data that would be helpful to make an improvement in any program. And also, it is also possible to just use the available resources that you have, because we actually used the navigators that we had. We didn't have to get other staffs from outside to come and collect this data. So it is possible to just use the available resource and be able to collect data that would be able to improve on the programs and that would be able to initiate some services that would better the patient's experience. So this is one of the things that we found out. And of course, as I said, given another opportunity, we will look at who else can be able to be used during this data collection and still give us the information that we need and still not need a lot of finances to do the same. And so I believe that it is possible to do, to collect this data and make an improvement in any program or even start one. And because we know that even with this patient navigation program that we have at Kenyatta National Hospital, it has required continuous improvement, and all the time you need to look at what is the current and how better can we be able to do this for the betterment of the patients. So the next slide. And so with these findings, we were able to come up with changes that would improve the prostate cancer patient's experience. And when we're looking at the financial aspect, we encouraged all the patients. So the navigators were able to encourage all the patients to register with the National Health Insurance Fund. This is a government insurance, health insurance for patients that supports patients as they undergo their treatment. And so when a patient is registered with this insurance, they are able to be covered for treatment and radiological examinations. And we also had to come up with a network of donors so that, because some of these patients are not able to even find money to register for this insurance. And so with the donors, they would be able to support the patients so that they can be able to register and access these services. And also there is usually a ceiling for the National Hospital Insurance Fund. And with the ceiling, then these donors would support the patients after the insurance has reached its limit. And with this, then we had to update the resource directory so that the navigators can be able to refer to it whenever they got a patient who needed support. And with the others, challenges were about the understanding of their diagnosis and treatment, psychosocial challenges, patients' physical issues and side effects. These were very key challenges and unique to these prostate cancer patients. And so we had to come up with a training that would help the navigators best support these patients. So we developed a curriculum that was more tailored to equip these navigators so that they can be able to gain specialized skills and knowledge so that they could better serve the prostate cancer patients, because we found out that there was a challenge, and even the navigators themselves were not well equipped to be able to deal with these challenges that the patients were facing. The other item that we did was to come up with a job aid. As much as they had gone through the training, and as a reference point, we developed a job aid card with the information that would be able to be useful so that the navigators can refer to it. It had information on diagnosis and treatment of the patients and communication techniques that they could be able to use so that they could be able to support these patients in a better way. And this job aid can also be found within the toolkit, the resource gallery, part 1 of activity 5H, determining your educational and support materials. It was very helpful, and it still is helpful to the navigators to refer to as they try to help these patients. We also had to create linkages of departments within the hospital, especially because there was sometimes the navigators, some challenges that the navigators were not able to handle within their capacity, and they needed to be referred. And so we had to create linkages within the hospital where the patients could be referred and receive the specialized help that they could be needing. And departments like the physiotherapy, the marital counseling, because these patients were coming up with some marital problems that were beyond the navigator's help, psychologists, and so forth, so that the patients were able to be referred here and they get the necessary help. We also established and convened prostate cancer support groups. And these were for peer-to-peer counseling, and they were very, very helpful. And we also encouraged the patients that they could tag along their wives so that they can be able better understand. Because one of the problem was that these patients were afraid of sharing some of their issues with their wives, lest they run away, or they just feared that they would have a problem if the wives got to know what they were going through. And so one of the things we did was to encourage them to tag along their wives so that they could all listen, and they could also see what the others have gone through and how they have handled it. And then the navigators also, through their encounters now, provided psychosocial support, and also because the patients had lacked understanding of their disease and treatment, they were able to support the patients and provide that information to the patients so that they are better equipped and they better understand the disease process, side effects, and the treatment. So with this, we have seen there is an improvement with the experience of the prostate cancer patients that are accessing services within Kenyatta National Hospital. And of course, to support this, we had to do to come up with standard operating procedures and also redesign the patient's flow. Thank you. That is the much that I was to present today. I am available to answer any questions that would come up.
Thank you so much, Grace. This was a wonderful presentation. You covered so much, and I'm sure that our audience is preparing to ask questions. I see one in the chat already. I just wanted to let you know we are going to switch it around a little bit. First, I told you we would keep all the questions until the end of both presentations, but one of our speakers, Bota, is having some challenges with connectivity. So we'll take the questions for Grace now, and then we'll wait for him to clear up those challenges. And if not, then we have Manjit, who will be able to still present the Uganda Cancer Institute's project. So the first question I see is from Pestus. How many times can a patient needs be assessed? Very good question.
Okay. Providing care is a continuous process, and there are always new ideas, new ways of doing things for the betterment of the patient. And this particular needs assessment was because establish the patient navigation for prostate cancer patients, specific for that diagnosis. And so as much as some of the patients who had been assessed during the initial patient navigation, the needs assessment of 2015, we know that there were some prostate cancer patients in it, but we did not establish specific unique challenges that they were facing. And so we had to actually be able to, we had to do another needs assessment so that we can be able to know what are these unique experiences these patients are experiencing. Then we can be able to address them specifically. So I believe needs assessment can be done as you journey on with the patients as the need arises, and as you need, and as you start new services as you go along.
Thank you. Thank you, Grace. We have another question from Nuna here, which is a wonderful one. Do you suggest to perform face-to-face interviews or focus group discussions to obtain more information from patients about their needs? Do you have any suggestions here? A choice between focus group discussions and face-to-face interviews? Or maybe we could even take this question a little bit broader, step back, and talk about the whole range of methods that are available, both qualitative and quantitative, that are part of the needs assessment. Because again, this is just, we're focusing on right now on two specific approaches, but there is endless number of methods to evaluate the needs assessments. So Grace, do you have some kind of tips about whether focus group discussions or face-to-face interviews are better for a specific purpose?
Yes, focus group is also good. As a follow-up of after the initial needs assessment, our follow-up surveys, we had combined types of needs assessment, data collection. And so we actually combined the face-to-face interview with the focus group discussion. And we were able to get information that was very valuable. And for these prostate cancer patients, they had very sensitive issues that unless they had started like support groups earlier, where they were able to open up and come up, putting them in a focused group discussion, and they have not been exposed before, would not help them to open up. Because even with face-to-face, they were not able to open up. But now later on, we realized that when they are in a group and they have had experience from pair to pairs, they were able to open up and they could share freely. And so maybe at that point is when then you could be able to get a focus group discussion kind of information gathering. But with the general cancer patients, we were able to combine the face-to-face with focus group, and we got valuable information.
Thank you. This is an excellent point. So it depends on how sensitive the issue is. It depends on multiple other factors, and of course, neither face-to-face interview nor focus group would be the first thing you do. The first thing you do would be some kind of quantitative survey, which would be brief but informative in terms of like what are the main gaps, what are patients experiencing in general, and then you would use the results of that survey to hone in on some of the questions and try to understand more deeply about what's going on with the patient, or how does it look like. We have so many patients that are reporting delays, but how does this delay look like? And then you go into either a focus group discussion which allows you to have some methods like card sorting activity to help sort through some of the main challenges if you have already some hypotheses that you need to prove, or you go into an in-depth interview with specific patients just to understand, or like in the next session we'll see in the next presentation, you can do observational assessment exercise. So, but yeah, depending on who your patients are, what kind of questions are asked, focus group discussion may be a blessing or a curse. Do we have any other opinions about the methods from anyone on this call?
I think it's also good to look at literacy levels and see whether, you know, the many contexts that people are operating in, whether a written document would make people feel vulnerable or it gives them more privacy. So all these are factors that one has to consider before you decide on what kind of method you want to use. And as we wait, remember, you can always post your questions on chat, or you can also raise your hand for us to be able to have you ask the question yourself, which is also good because we are interacting and we want to hear you speak. And at the same time, Erica or Haley had posted and some information in the chat guiding us on to where a lot of what Grace has presented is available. That the presentation she's given on downloading the patient needs assessment. I mean, you can download it. The report that came from Kenyatta on section 2D of our toolkit. So please also take time to go into the community and be able to get that information in more detail. We do have a comment here or a question. What is the difference between patient barrier assessment and patient needs assessment?
Mm-hmm. Would anyone on this call like to chime in before we get this? Maybe based on, you know, either your professional experiences or based on what you read in the toolkit. So, Grace, do you have anything, or should I try to take this?
Okay, you can go ahead and take it.
So the needs assessment and the barriers. So before doing any kinds of needs assessment, you map out the patient flow in your facility, and you see what are the inside facility barriers that patients are facing, right? Or maybe facing. What are the bottlenecks? And then you do the needs assessment to kind of ascertain and observe some of these barriers and how they are impacting patients. So a patient's needs is in another word, the barrier that that patient is facing. It may be community level need to overcome community level barriers, or facility level need. Could be something connected to socio-demographic status of the patient. So these are very related concepts. And I see Nuna has a raised hand. Go ahead, please.
Hello, everyone. I have a question regarding the thing that you have told just now. Like it is desirable to perform observation of the patient and then go to the need assessment part. Will you suggest to do those activities among same patients, or there is no difference? We can perform observation of like several patients and go to the need assessment with the other ones.
Good
to avoid
question.
some biases, or it will not introduce any bias?
We are not like part of this very, you know, scientific, because not all our patients are able to participate in more than one study. It's very hard to get consent to participate, organize the same patients to come back for different kinds of assessments. And honestly, it doesn't really matter, because you have the whole body of patients that you are serving. So it's okay if you have one cohort of patients that you observed, but then you go into another type of assessment, or even conduct a survey to a different subgroup of your patients. As long as you have patients, these groups, these cohorts are representing really your patient body. That is what's more important. So if you have records on sociodemographic status of your patients, trying to making the selection process for them mirror the group of your patients is very important. So if you have most of your patients are in their 50s and you have 60% or 70% that are women, and then in your observation you are observing 30-year-old males, that may not be the best way of targeting your patients. But if the representation is kind of reflecting your demographics for the patients, then it's totally fine to have different individuals participate in different studies. Do we have any other opinions here, Erica?
Yeah, can I just jump in for a second? I think that when we have done surveys, so large scale quantitative assessments at KNH, for example, and we're about to embark again, or we just embarked on one in Uganda, we have not intentionally tried to follow up with the same patients. Like Andrew was saying, we worked really hard to get a sample of patients that's representative of the entire patient population. It's very difficult to get the same patients to follow up. And in fact, we've been intentional to find out if a patient has already participated in a survey and counted them out so that we can get a new patient sample that's representative. And one thing I wanted to mention as far as barrier assessment and needs assessment, I think there's a lot of different terminology. It can get very confusing. And I think the main thing is to be thinking about what information do you need and when? What are you trying to understand? And so, for example, generally we have used a needs assessment to be that preliminary type of understanding of what patients' needs are generally in your environment, whether it's a qualitative or quantitative study, focus groups, whatever that might be, but it's really trying to understand what your patients generally are going through. Whereas when we talk about a barrier assessment, we're generally talking about the navigator doing some sort of interactive understanding with an individual patient about what barriers they are experiencing in their particular situation.
And just to say, this is exactly what I've written just now in the chat as another, just to reiterate, that's also exactly what Erica said is what I just wanted to comment on.
Thank you. Thank you, Erica and Haley. And I'm hearing that Oboda is here, so let me pull up a slide again. I'd like to thank Grace for a wonderful presentation today and for taking some questions. And I'm sure there will be some more questions to both speakers at the end. So thank you, Grace. And Oboda, welcome. Can you hear us? So I'd like to present Oboda Amos, patient navigation program manager at the Uganda Cancer Institute, who will be telling us about their experiences at UCI with patient shadowing, which is a great observational assessment exercise. Oboda, can you hear us?
Obote seems to have dropped off again, unfortunately.
Okay.
I think he's joining, but he's not connected to the audio. Obote, can you hear us?
Then we have Manjit, who does have connectivity, and Manjit is the co-director of Mabadiliko Changemakers. She's our wonderful TA provider and part of the team. And she is based in Kampala, Uganda, and she has supported UCI in planning and implementing the patient shadowing exercise.
Manjit?
Manjit, can you go online and or can you get off mute and maybe do the presentation? And then if Obote joins us, Obote, feel free to jump in and let us know that you have sound, and then you can take over.
Okay, good afternoon, good morning, good evening, everybody. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can hear you great.
Okay. I'm going to switch off the video because the connection is not so good. So if you don't mind, at least we have a connection, at least you can have my voice. Okay, so we did a patient shadowing exercise at the Uganda Cancer Institute. As we were designing the program, we were trying to understand what is actually happening at the Uganda Cancer Institute in terms of the cancer care experience. And we had the insight from the clinical staff and within UCI, but we didn't have the experience or the voice of the patient. And we thought we would do this observational study to try and understand what is the patient's experience. So, what is their, what do they experience, and how do they see things happening for their care within the Uganda Cancer Institute. And so we did this observational study. So we were trying to understand and map the patient's flow from the patient's perspective, seeing things through the eyes of the patient. At the same time, we were wanting to use this observational study to look at, what are the challenges and the barriers and bottlenecks patients are facing, that they are facing in terms of, sorry, can we go back a slide? Yeah, that they are facing when they're accessing care at UCI, but sort of seeing it from their perspective rather than seeing it from what we had seen in patient studies and we heard from patient studies, but we actually wanted to observe and with the patient and get it right there and then as well. And it was also a way of trying to understand, what is the team doing well and maybe not doing so well. And then all of this information was going to help us to design our patient navigation program, and at the same time identify some areas that we could start improving on before we even decide the program and as part of designing the program as well. Next slide, please. Okay, so we did this study in July 2019. It was over a 3-day period, and we looked at 18 patients who were both adult patients and children, new patients, revisit patients, patients coming for treatment, patients coming for screening. So this is the population that the Uganda Cancer Institute serves. So we took this opportunity to actually try and understand what's happening to the patients across the different target groups that the institute is serving. And we looked at the different care pathways that the patient is going through. So when they come as a new patient and they're visiting entry into care, when they come for their treatment, when they come for their follow-up visits, or when they come for screening. So this was the different care pathways or service points that we were looking at. We actually identified 4 people from outside the institute with the medical and the health background to help us to do the survey, so that it kind of gave a bit of a distance for the patients, that the patients didn't feel so that, okay, I am having somebody working with me and following me, and I may not be able to be so confident in sharing my experience or my concerns if it's a staff member, because I don't know what the impact will be on my care. So we thought having somebody from outside would be useful in that perspective. We had a 1-day orientation for the shadowers, and we gave them some a shadowing guide, talked through the process of how they were going to do the shadowing exercise, and also what kind of skills and that knowledge that they needed, and how to, the interpersonal communication that they needed to have with the patients as well. On the day of the observations, we had patients being selected at the gates at Uganda Cancer Institute, and it has 3 main gates that patients come into the complex. And so we had the shadowers waiting there. They met with the patient, they explained the process to them, and then if they were agreeable, did a verbal consent and went through the shadowing exercise with the patient, whether it was for 1 hour or it was the whole day exercise. But what we wanted to do was to follow the patient from the time that they entered the institute to the time that they finished their journey that day. And then we had a coordinator who was overseeing the process and making sure that we actually reached the targeted patients that we had wanted to, had set as targets, the 18 patients. Next slide. Okay. So what we did is when we got the results, as the shadowers were using an exercise book with a list of questions that they were trying to address with each patient, looking at, for example, when a patient, what happens when the patient goes to a particular service point? How do they interact with the clinical staff, or how do the clinical staff interact with them? How long is the patient waiting? What are the patient's verbal cues and non-verbal cues? And then we finished off looking at what the patient's thoughts and feelings were at the end of the visit as well. And what we found is that all this information was collated into an Excel spreadsheet, which was organized by the different clinic and service points that the patient had gone through. And our results were very interesting. They actually confirmed a lot of the information that we had found by doing other studies at the Institute with the ACS, which were the patient care studies, and also the patient flow maps that we had been created by the staff. So some of the key things that we found was that entry point into care. Patients, when they came into their cares, into the different service points, many of them were not being welcomed. Many of them were just weren't even asked to sit down. They just followed the lead of what other patients were doing. And that is how the flow was happening with the patients. They were not really informed of what the process was going to be and what their steps in their care was going to be. The provider-patient communication was very much guided towards instructions to the patient, just wait, and we will come back to you. There were many patients were getting lost around Uganda Cancer Institute, and this was also revealed through the observational study. There was very little health education that was being given to patients, and largely this was because of the workload of the staff. They were just too busy. They didn't have the time to spend with the patients for health education, whether on an individual basis or whether as a group basis. There were waiting times. This is very interesting findings. You know, we found that patients in some clinics were waiting maybe a very short period of time to see the patient, to see the doctor. And in other clinics, they could be there for 5 or 6 hours waiting to see the doctor. And part of that was because of the doctors being very busy, but also part of it was that the doctors were caught up in meetings, and so they were not able to come and provide the clinical services that they needed to provide. And it just delayed their service delivery as well. And then patient records, it was very interesting. Again, it reinforced the fact that patient records were often being lost or being filed. They were in another department. A patient was here to see a senior doctor for chemotherapy treatment, but their records were still in the records office. They hadn't moved to the department where they were going to get their treatment. And language barriers and out-of-pocket expenses as well. All of these findings were actually reinforced by following these 18 patients through the day. Yes, it just kind of gave more of a qualitative experience of the patients, and as well as, you know, we do the studies, we have this information, but this was really seeing and observing it from the patient's perspective and going with the patients as they went through this experience. Some of the other findings that we found, the new findings, were that cleaning of the work areas. So patients were coming in for their for the outpatient appointments, yet the cleaners were still cleaning the area. And there was also kind of like staff, lack of clarity about different staff, who was supposed to be doing what, when, who were they supposed to see when. And then a very simple one was patients come in with their documentation, and when they register, they need to have their copy of their documentation. But to try and get photocopies was very difficult. they had to actually go outside the hospital complex to get that photocopying done. So these were kind of all gave us, sorry, next slide, gave us ideas of, you know, what things could be needed to be addressed immediately and what things could wait and be addressed as part of the patient navigation program. So when we got this information, what we did was that we presented this information not as a standalone study, but as a kind of a combined information. Okay, we had these other studies that had been done at UCI, the UCI ACS patient studies, quality of care studies. We had the patient flows that had been created by the clinical staff as well. And now we had the observational study. So we took these three different exercises and we collapsed the results and came up with thematic areas for each of these and sort of said, okay, this thematic area of sort of a patient communication with the patient, which of these studies that we have done demonstrate that? And it was often interesting to note, yes, it was maybe shown in all three areas, all three studies, or it may be just shown in one or two studies as well. So having these thematic areas, and they were, you know, going from thematic areas of information, health education, customer client communication, amongst other areas as well. So we presented these findings, we created a PowerPoint, and we developed a summary, which we then presented to the UCI design team for the navigation program. We presented it to the different departments within the Uganda Cancer Institute as well. So we presented it to the chemotherapy department, radiotherapy department, administration, as well as presenting it to the senior management team as well. And then we also did some presentations to the patient navigation design workshop, which we had with the ACS team as we were designing and developing the proposal for the navigation program. And as much as possible, we were trying to encourage people to share this information and these results out within their staff members, but also with other departments. So if we didn't go to a particular department and presented the findings, we were encouraging the staff still to talk about it within their interdepartmental meetings as well. So some of the lessons that we learned as we're doing the shadowing exercises is that the patients actually felt much more comfortable about being able to share what their experiences were and open up to the shadowers, because they were not staff members. They felt, this is somebody who I can talk to, I can be honest with, I can be open with, without fearing that it will go back and impact on my care as well. So this is really interesting observation. And we also find that the shadowers themselves, as by doing this exercise, they also had some observations, feedbacks, which was reflective on how the care was being provided and supported what the patients were saying as well. But from their perspective of being a healthcare provider in another setting coming into UCI, and they were able to give us a lot of information which was very useful to help us as well, and kind of supported what the patient's experiences were as well. So by going through this exercise, we actually identified some of the priorities and the experiences which we may have otherwise missed if we hadn't gone through with the patients and walked and done these observations with them as well. Because as we said, it really was kind of understanding the patient's experience from the patient's side. And the observers spent the whole day with them, or even a couple of hours. They did not intervene, they just stayed with the patient and followed with the patient, and just was with them. So we had used this Excel spreadsheet for capturing the information. So there was a lot of information that we had generated, and the Excel spreadsheet at the end was not the best tool to have used. So we, in the future, or if somebody's looking to do a shadowing exercise, we would ask them to consider using some kind of system or a simple program rather than an Excel sheet, which is great and wonderful, but depending on the number of patients you're observing, it could become a very large, lengthy document as well. So we learned what was happening well and doing within the UCI team, and we were able to share these experiences with the other staff members and other departments as well. So, for example, we had situations where we had some staff who were very courteous and very helpful when patients came in. And it was just a question of asking the patients, how are you today? Good morning, how are you today? Do you have any concerns? And it just broke the ice with the patient, and it kind of gave the patient a different experience. So these simple things we were just able to reinforce. It's not as if the organization wasn't aware that this was happening, but it just helped to reinforce the other findings that we had, and the reinforced observations that had been made by the staff themselves. So some of the UCI processes and procedures were actually part of the challenges that the patients faced. The fact that the pharmacy was closing at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and patients were still being seen at 2:30 by the time they got to the pharmacy. It was a little bit too late, so they had to come back the following day. So these types of issues that were identified from the patient's perspective, we were able to try and address them, taking into consideration the clinical staff, but also the patient's perspectives, and come up with a better flow and management. So what we would suggest is that something like a shadowing exercises needs to be done more regularly, and it can be done at a departmental unit level. It doesn't have to be the whole institute, it doesn't have to be the whole organization, but this could be as part of the quality intervention that people are carrying out within their organizations or within their department. And it's not necessary to have to follow 18 patients. You can actually follow a smaller cohort, 1 or 2 patients, just to see what their experience is as well, and see whether changes have been noted, and the patient is experiencing those changes. If we were going to repeat this exercise, we would refocus the exercise on adult patients rather than doing both adults and pediatrics, and also prioritize the service areas that we would want to look at in particular. Where are the major blocks happening that from our own experience, and try and do a shadowing exercise in those areas to give us more information to help us to come up with our solutions to address those from the patient's perspective. I think, okay, so
and I just wanted to add that we do have a bota now who finally has his microphone connected. So
okay, great.
Just wanted to thank you, Manjit, so much for fielding this and carrying it on. Great job. Bota, can you hear us?
Yes,
do you want to add
can.
anything? Okay, so yeah.
Yeah. Hi everyone. Sorry, I had a little bit of a technology problem here, but I think I'm able to proceed from this point. Thank you, everyone. Andrew, thank you so much.
And thank you, Manjit.
Manjit, thank you for filling in the gap. But I think what Manjit has said, I was able to hear and understand for some few minutes. And for the rest of the team, shadowing is such an interesting experience that one would want to have. A lot of studies had been done, but there are these smaller things that we ignore, and especially from the perspective of patients. And when we engage people who do not understand the system, for instance, we use health workers who didn't understand the system. They encountered similar challenges within the system, like any other person, and they were willing to express how they felt, even to the higher management level. So it helped us to see the simple changes we needed to have made, and using the resources available, and also getting the will of the people to address their problems. So the findings of shadowing is it wasn't far different from what we had, but it added more value. It actually emphasized on the challenges that patients were going through. And there were also others that we would not clearly see them, like out of pocket. Remember, some people who were shadowing were asked, can you give some money here? Which were informal payments within the system. It was very difficult for us to know who picks informal payments, who asks for them. So all this came to light, adding on other studies. So doing things differently, as Manjit said, we may have to involve staff in shadowing, but I still think they may not bring out clearly, because it's part of their, unless we are going to, it may work out in a better way that you bring staff from other units to shadow in other units. That would make a little more meaning than picking me who does the same things every day to shadow and so forth. And also making it very regular. It is something that we may need to adapt as part of the quality improvement. People do quality checks, quality assessment, and they set targets and they have the tools. But I think shadowing could be part. Our patient navigation program is a quality improvement program. And in this case, patient's experience is very key. So it is this shadowing that help us got the real patient's experience as they move around. So shadowing should be a routine practice to check into how are we offering or providing our services, especially the navigation services. How are we addressing the challenges within our system? So I think that is where we are. It is such a very interesting experience. For my first time to do shadowing, I loved it so much. Even the people we engaged loved it so much, and I think they may have done it wherever they could be. Thank you so much. I think we can go to the next slide to have it.
This is the last slide about the changes you made. Yeah.
Oh, thank you. I would wait for other questions or other summaries if it is necessary. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Obote, Manjit, and Grace. So now we are inviting the questions for the Uganda Cancer Institute's patient shadowing program. And maybe if one of you has a question, another question for Kenyatta. And I see Nune has raised her hand. Please go ahead, Nune. Nune?
Yeah. Do you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, great. I have a question regarding patient shadowing, whether the patient should be informed that there is a shadower and he or she will follow the patient during the whole day, or it should remain in secret. So anything in the patient like behavior will not be changed due to that information that there is someone who is following him.
It's a great question. Obote?
Yeah, I think I can respond to that quickly. The first thing is the patients or the clients should consent verbally to have the shadower or the person performing the shadowing be part of their care team for that day. So if the patient consent, then he or she becomes part of the care team for that patient. And that takes, like, practically what we did was we had to put the people doing the shadowing at the gates, supported by the staff at the gate. So when a patient comes, the staff interfaces with the patient says, I'm going today for my chemotherapy. So the staff introduces that there's a person who wants to understand, a person's put by UCI to understand how we offer care to you. Can he or she be part of your care team to bring it out, to see practically what happens? He will not interfere with what the health workers will do to you, and you don't need to inform the health worker that there's someone else in this team. So most of the clients we interface with were so much willing to have this person work with them. And along the way, they experienced the problems together, especially when the patients got lost. Even the shadower got lost with the patient. When they were asking for out of pocket. The shadower was also the kind of person who was asked. So that is very key, that the person whom we have selected for shadowing, or the clients we have selected for shadowing, should consent verbally and accept this person performing the shadowing to be part of their care team throughout that day. We can also pull it only for a small component, but small component of their care will not bring the real picture. So they came from the gate and they ended up to the gate when the client was leaving the hospital. So that is how it happened. So they worked at every touch point, at every care point the patient was working, such that they experienced what the patient experienced in the same day with the patient, and they recorded in a structured tool. I hope I've answered that.
Yes, thank you very much. I have another question related to the first one, if you allow me.
Go ahead.
If during that shadowing process, the patient asks for the help to the shadower. For example, the patient get lost, she is asking the way to the certain point in the facility, whether the shadower should help, or that interference may introduce a bias, and that will not receive the information that we wanted.
Great question.
Thank you. I think quickly, the people we use for shadowing equally didn't know our system. So the clients could not even ask them for guidance or for help. So they became part of the care team of the patient, so they could approach the health worker together. Where do we get from this point? We want to get to this point. So that is the importance of getting a person who doesn't know the system, such that they feel how easy or hard it is to access the care. So that's what exactly happened with us.
So they should not help.
No. The people we selected didn't know and could not help the patient.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yes.
Dr. Vitalis, you have a question?
Yes. Yes, I have a question and a comment too. I hope you can hear me.
Yes.
Okay. I think from my understanding of shadowing, it seems to be a more practical way of having patients experience in the care journey. So it's actually quite interesting. But my concern is now, do you select some patients to do? How do you select patients you do shadowing? That is one. Or do you target every patient? Or is it like, is a study, you choose patients randomly? Or what influence your selection for patients? That is number one. Then number two is a situation where you don't have much staff that will be available. Let's assume many staffs are busy with their work schedule and may not come out to be following patients up. How do you do it? Can patients' relatives kind of stand for or do the same service for shadowing? Let's assume patient relatives who has been coming or can some patient relatives be trained to do the job of shadowing? Thank you.
Thank you.
The most important thing we considered were the key services being provided and the key service points. That's how we started the thinking of where are we going to carry out the shadowing and for what purpose and who should do it. So when we realized and highlighted the different service points, we came up with about 6 key service points where services are offered, and we would wish to understand how those services, how patients experience those services. So the first thing was we got key service points: radiotherapy, OPD, chemotherapy. We got those points. Now, that informed the selection of our clients. So we said we decided that let's have average of this number of patients shadowed in for radiotherapy, this number of patients shadowed for chemotherapy, this number of patients shadowed for screening, and so forth. Now, we could not determine who is coming in for that service that day. So we do not know whether it's the first person coming in for the service or the last person. So that's how we ended up saying, let's use health workers, because this is more of research. People who have had experience in collecting data from patients and who can understand the ethical components. That's how we chose the nurses, clinical officers who had never come to Uganda Cancer Institute, and they didn't know anything about the services offered. So we assembled them, we trained them on what they're going to do, what it takes, and the tool they're going to use. Having trained them, we assembled them at the gate. So the number of patients we pulled was on average of 3 per unit. And that is how we came to around about 18 patients and clients. So the person would ask, who is coming in? If the person is for the service that we have not selected, we don't invite that person. We don't engage with that person to be part of their care team. If we realize that this is the person who is going for the service at the point we have selected, that is how we invite them to accept us to become part of their, or the shadower to become part of their care team. So it is something that we need to work on. First of all, is the experience may be the same, but also it depends on the person providing the service and the person receiving the service, because we may have gotten different experiences provided at the same point by different people or from different clients. So the second thing we considered were the people doing the shadowing. We intended to have it not known by the shadowers, because we wanted it to be more objective. We wanted to get the real experience. How is it? And we had trained them to report it how it happened. So the last thing we considered were how many number of patients can give us the experience we wanted, which is not clear. So we ended up deciding on some numbers of patients without a proper backing, because we expected about 3 patients experiences per service point to be quite adequate. So that is how we chose it. Thank you.
Thank you, Obote. And we have just 2 more questions in the chat. And Obote, we have like 30 seconds. So if you could answer them both. The first question is, do the shadowers ask questions or just listen and follow? And I think you alluded to that already. Can you just restate it?
Yes. The shadowers are now part of the care team. They are not investigating anything. So what the care team is asking, they are part of it. What the clients are asking, they are part of it. If the clients got lost with the shadower, they ask, where do we go from this point? So they are part of the care team. They are not asking any other question. But while they work with the clients, they tend to note what the client is talking about. Sometimes clients talk about their experience. I think this health worker didn't treat me right. Why should they ask me for this? So some of them had to, when patients say that out, they note. It doesn't mean they're interviewing the patient. So that is how it happened.
Thank you. And a question from Brazil, from Oncoguia. How receptive were patients in agreeing to a shadower? Was there hesitancy, and did they receive any incentives? And again, just 30 seconds.
I think I said that at the beginning, that most patients were willing to have, because we said these are part of the UCI team who wants to know how UCI is providing services to them, but they will not interfere with the processes of service provision to them. So most of the clients, I think only 1 client did not accept, but the rest, all of them accepted. So their clients are much more willing to have the shadowers join them as part of their care team.
Thank you. Thank you so much to Obote, Grace, and the invisible Manjit, who has saved the day today with the presentation.
Yeah. Sorry, Andre, may I just add, we gave no incentive to the participants who were the patients. There was no incentives.
Yeah, that's important.
Okay.
Thank you. So thank you for the audience for your wonderful questions. I see people are engaged and there are some light bulbs that are lighting up. We have to move on because we have only 5 minutes left, and I'll just fly through some of these slides. Please remember that you have the technical assistance hours. Each organization has 25 hours total in TA over the next 15 months. Over the 15 months period in total. This slide just shows some of the things that TA providers can do for you and what we cannot do. So in general, we cannot develop documents and procedures for you. We cannot do your IRB assessments for you and anything for you, but we can help you think through these things. We can help you design and get feedback on your ideas or your documents or your plans. So please do use us, reach out, and we'll schedule some time together. There are 2 hot tips for the Beacon community. A number of people have reached out to us saying they have issues logging back into the community after the initial session. And it appears that many people are just going back to the original email that they received, the registration email, and going back to the link to registration. That link no longer works. So just make sure that there is one item that you need to bookmark in your browser, and that's the link that's on the left here, beaconcommunity.cancer.org. If you just type it in, beaconcommunity.cancer.org, you will get to the login page. And then once you log in using your credentials, you'll be able to access the community anytime in the future. And then there is one more functionality that came up last week. I don't know how many of you have noticed, but it's a small button here that's right on the homepage of the community under the calendar on the right side. It says watch event recordings. If you click it, you'll be taken to our YouTube video playlist, and you'll be able to see all the recordings from all past events. So please make sure that you check it out. Just a reminder for communication. So if in doubt, write to both email addresses, but this is in general, these are the 2 email addresses, and what your questions may be addressed by either one of these emails. We have upcoming webinars. I just put out 3 here, but we have more planned out for you. So we'll let you know about the July ones in the next webinar, but also make sure that you follow through the banners. We'll be announcing them on the banners. May 25th is a toolkit orientation webinar on introduction to section 5, monitoring and evaluation and learning activities, and Haley and Shide will be co-leading it. June 8th is the toolkit deep dive / ask an expert. It's going to be about mapping your patient flow to understand, I'm sorry, as a patient care experience. Today we talked about what do you do after you map the patient flow, but on June 8th we'll go back and talk about how do you map it in order to understand all your care points. And June 22nd, determining your resource navigation staffing needs. That will be the first one out of this mini series of 3, because for each type of navigator, we'll be having a session on determining the resource, the staffing needs for that type of navigator. So please join us. It's always at 1 p.m. Greenwich Mean Time. Provide us with your feedback, check with us, regarding the individualized TA assistance. And remember that we'll post this recording by the end of the week, if not earlier. And for closing, please, I know Shahid has already posted the link to the chat. Please use that link to provide us with your feedback for this session. We always take it very seriously. So thank you so much to everyone, and we'll see you on May 25th at the next webinar.